Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on source evaluation. So I love this quote from Bertrand Russell, and I think it sets the tone really nicely for this presentation. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. And with that, let's get started. So one of the reasons we're talking about this is that, and maybe you did some of this in 101, I hope you did. Not only is it important for your argument essay, but it's become an ever more important skill in this modern world we're living in. But to circle back to the task at hand, the argument essay, we've looked at this before, and we're going to keep looking at it because it's so important. But as we know, the key to a strong argument, one that's actually persuasive and ethical, is to rely on logic, which we've got a presentation on that for you to watch, and also to appeal to people's emotions, because that's the only way to actually get them to do anything. Because at the end of the day, as much as we may like to think that we make decisions with our sense of logic and reason first, and that our emotions come from that, the reality is that it's the other way around, right? That we have emotional responses to things first, and then we use our logic and reasoning to justify those responses. So we'll definitely talk more about that, because as much as you don't want to believe that that's true, it is true, and it's backed up by science. So the thing we're going to be focusing on more today is this top part of the triangle, the appeal to trust. So in order for you to persuade anyone and to change our minds, or at least to get us to respectfully, we can respectfully disagree, but as long as we respect your argument and the case you're making, that may be the best you're going to do at this time, and that's actually pretty good. That's still progress, and the only way to do that is to establish a sense of trust in those you are arguing with. So the key to that, of course, is your source support. Okay, so we want to go into this with a healthy dose of skepticism. So a lot of times people think they hear the word skeptic and it's got a negative connotation, kind of going along with this little silly cartoon here up in the corner. Truth is a conspiracy kind of thing. Well, no, I mean, when we talk about skepticism, and I think this definition here from Stephen Novella, who wrote The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is a fantastic book, highly recommend it. I wish I could assign it as assigned reading. It's so good. But this definition from the book is, I think, a really succinct explanation of what skepticism is. Okay, so a skeptic is one who prefers beliefs and conclusions that are reliable and valid to ones that are comforting or convenient, and therefore rigorously and openly applies the methods of science and reason to all empirical claims, especially their own. A skeptic provisionally proportions acceptance of any claim to valid logic and a fair and thorough assessment of available evidence, and studies the pitfalls of human reason and the mechanisms of deception so as to avoid being deceived by others or themselves. Okay, so this is what we're going for. This is the aim, the goal. Like, we want to be skeptics. We want to go for beliefs and conclusions that are reliable and valid versus comforting or convenient. Okay, and to do that, like it says, we have to rigorously apply the methods of logic and reason, right? Which I cover in that other video. And we have to be really, really tough on our own assumptions and our own beliefs, and be skeptical about ourselves as much as we are with others, maybe more so, because it's pretty easy to see the flaws in other people's logic, and to notice when something is not credible or trustworthy if it disagrees with what you believe already. Like, that's pretty easy. Most people don't have a hard time with that. What's hard to do is to take a step back and objectively look at your own beliefs and your own kind of scaffolding that you use to perceive the world, and to be tough on yourself. So we're going to talk about some of the more common biases today and how to spot them in other sources as well. So the first thing we need to cover is, when you're out looking for sources, the two basic flavors of sources you can find. And we're not going to necessarily privilege one over the other per se, because it really depends on your topic and depends on what you can find and depends on, well, it depends on a lot of things. So here we go. So popular sources are typically, the audience is going to be a broader, more general audience. Like you encounter popular sources all the time. These are typically written or created by journalists or professional writers, or even now a lot of average people too, who are not professionals. So the thing about professional writers is that they don't get to pick the topics they write about. They're typically not experts in the topic they're writing about. They're just assigned that topic by their editor. So yeah, it's not something they choose or necessarily passionate about or something they necessarily know more about than other people. It's just something they've been tasked with writing about, whether they care or not. So I've got a friend who's a freelance professional writer, and she, like, the topics that she writes about and the publication she writes for range from, oh my gosh, she's done everything from like articles for Dog Fancy magazine. Yeah, that's a magazine. To she's done a lot of work on those Uncle John's bathroom reader books. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Those big books that you see like at your grandpa's house or whatever in the bathroom. Yeah, she's one of the people who helps write those, to kind of more serious news sources and stuff like that. It just depends. It's like wherever she can get the work. So she doesn't necessarily have like a specific area of expertise. She's just really good at writing about anything she's told to write about. So, that's just the name of the game. But as you can imagine, like, that can possibly be problematic. So if these sources are reviewed at all, it depends on the source, then they're going to be reviewed by general editors. And those people, they're not necessarily experts in the subject matter either. They just give the assignments and they look over them when they come in. And if you're lucky, they fact check them, and it depends on the publication. Typically, these sources rely on advertising and sponsorship to stay up. Like, it's hard to get people to actually subscribe to news sources anymore, and even then, that wasn't enough to keep the lights on. Instead, a lot of the revenue, that keep these publications going comes from advertisers and sponsors. And where that can be a problem is when we run into conflicts of interest. If their advertiser or sponsor has some kind of vested interest in a current issue, then that means that the source may not be able to fully report on it the way that they would have, because they don't want to upset the sponsor or the advertiser. So good popular sources will always reveal who their sponsors and advertisers are. That's really, really important. And they'll especially do that if the subject they're reporting on, if there's a possible conflict of interest with their advertiser. So some examples, just like magazines, newspaper or news sources, blogs. These would be considered, basically anything that's open access, anything you can get to through Google without having to go through a paywall is considered a popular source. And even sometimes there are paywalls. So like the New York Times or that kind of thing, you might have to pay to get access to more than a couple of articles per week or whatever. So yeah, anything that you can get to through Google, that's a popular source. So scholarly academic sources, these are going to be subject-specific journals, academic journals. And these are by subscription only. You cannot find these in stores. You cannot find them through search engines. And so the databases that we have at Greenwell Tech, that is what they do. They subscribe to these subject-specific journals for you guys to research in. And then we as a college pay the databases in order to have access to them. Okay, so anytime you're doing research, if you're like using Google Scholar or whatever, and if you find something that's in a subject-specific journal you want to use, and it says, okay, you can read the abstract, but you can't read anything else, or you can only read these pages out of the however many pages there are, unless you pay to do it, don't do that, because seriously, don't do that, because we probably subscribe to that journal already through the databases. And if you're not sure, just ask me and we'll find out. These sources are geared more toward experts, researchers, professionals in a certain field. So they're not the kind of thing you'd find sitting on somebody's coffee table or bathroom reading or whatever. They are, again, very subject specific, and they're written at a much more academic and technical level. So one of the things that makes scholarly sources so different from popular sources is that these are peer reviewed, and peer review is really important because what it means is, my terrible star there for you. What it means is that if you were to write an article, if you did some research, some primary research, or you did a review of some research and you wanted to publish an article in a scholarly journal, you would have to go through a pretty rigorous peer review process, which means that your work would have to be looked at very carefully by a selection of people who are also in your field, and they would review it to make sure that your research methods were appropriate and acceptable, and that they're going into it as skeptics, basically, because they don't want anything to get out or published that would be a setback for their field, right? They don't want bad junk science getting out into the field. Unfortunately, that has happened. So a pretty good example of a time when that happened and that had devastating consequences was when, I'm sure y'all have heard of it before, but there are people who believe pretty strongly, pretty fervently, that vaccinations, specifically the measles, mumps, rubella vaccination, causes autism, when there's been just scads and scads of research done that has proven that no, it absolutely does not. But why do so many people believe that? Well, back in the 90s, there was a researcher named Andrew Wakefield who published an article in a pretty reputable medical journal called The Lancet, and it's still around and it's still considered a reputable journal, but the peer review clearly was not done thoroughly enough, and this article got out that basically claim there was a causal link between the vaccines and autism. But going back and looking more carefully at this guy's research, well, his sample size was super small. He researched on 12 kids. That's not enough. And there were kids he knew. He was taking blood samples from kids at his son's birthday party. I'm not even kidding. I'm not making this up. It's insane. And then it turns out, later on, they found out that the data he presented was straight up fabricated. That's just a nice word for made up. Okay. So he lied, right? He lied. But because the peer review was not, the Lancet was so excited to let to be the first to publish this incredible revelation, it's done an incredible amount of damage. But that's why you'll never find a scholarly article citing Wakefield's research after 2007, because that is when he was discredited as a fraud. So anytime people argue online and say that, oh, there's science to back up the vaccine autism link, all of their sources they're citing are from before 2007, and that's why. So peer review is crucially important, and the Lancet, of course, learned a really tough lesson, and their reputation has been tarnished as a result. But yeah, it's crucial. Unfortunately, a lot of real damage has been done as a result. So it's got to happen. So if it's done correctly, then these things take much, much longer to get published. And so that's kind of the downside of these sources, is that if you're working with a topic that's really recent, that's really fresh, then you may have a hard time finding scholarly academic sources because they may just not have gotten published yet, because it takes a lot longer. Whereas popular sources can get churned out super fast by comparison, on the daily, right? Or multiple times a day. So that's the difference. It's pretty glacial in terms of the timeline compared to popular sources. But when done correctly, they are the most reliable things we have. So just some examples, American Journal of Occupational Therapy, Environmental Science Quarterly, Chronicle of Higher Education. That's one that I have to subscribe to and read. Would I take it to the beach with me? No. It's a professional journal that, maybe one day I'll publish an article in or something, who knows, but it's not super exciting. It's technical kind of academic stuff. So I say all this because, when we're dealing with popular sources, which a lot of y'all probably will have to do, everybody's always yelling about fake news. And yeah, there's a lot of, we know that. You guys you're not dupes. You know that there's a lot of quackery out there and fake news out there. And so That doesn't mean you shouldn't trust anything. It just means you have to go in with your best suit of armor because, as hopefully you saw in that video I posted about search algorithm bias, which you should totally watch if you haven't, because it's nuts, right? Watch it. It's like 5 minutes. It will blow your mind. Okay. Google is not going, Facebook, Google, they cannot protect you from this stuff. And frankly, I don't know that, I mean, the Google thing is pretty messed up, but is it really that, should we really put faith in these, these search engines and these media giants to do this for us? I don't know that we can. I don't know that we should. We need to have our own tools to be able to do this because it's never going to go away. If anything, it's just going to get more and more tricky and sophisticated. So we got to go into it with our best possible suit of armor. So as the infographic here says, this is all good advice. I want to start with this one down here, right? First thing first, is this a joke? I mean, there's a lot of satire news sites out there, and I've actually had students who did not realize that the source that they were using was it was just a joke. It was just satire. It was from like The Onion or The Hard Times or whatever, and they're like, "Look at this! It's incredible." It is incredible, as in it's not credible. Like it's a joke, and they just didn't get the joke. So just watch out for that. Like just like Google the name of the source. That is such an easy, simple thing to do. And I do it all the time. Like if I get a weird YouTube video that comes up from from like PragerU or something, which if you don't know who that is, you can look it up. It's or like the Epoch Times or like just weird stuff. I'm like, I've never heard of this source before. I've never heard of, like, Google it. And you'll find all kinds of stuff out about it, and they'll tell you exactly what kind of source it is. And they'll be like, okay, it's a joke. Or no, these people are crazy bananas. Don't believe anything they say. So that takes us to consider the source. Okay. Don't just look at the article. Look at their contact info, look at their mission statement, look at their about page. Like you can find they should be telling you all that kind of stuff about themselves. And if they don't, then that's a red flag. But you can find a lot there too. Dig around a little bit. What else? Yeah, check into the author. You can Google author names too. Like search the author's name. I do that all the time as well. Especially if I'm like, I don't know about this. I'll take a look at the author, see what I can find out about their credentials, or even if they're a real person. Because y'all, there are articles out there that are being manufactured, like that are fake, that are intentionally trying to disrupt our society. So we got to do this. Like it's a thing. It's just the new normal. Also looking at the date, how current is the information you're working with? So I think that Wakefield, the Wakefield results article, that the 2007 thing, that's a really important example, I think, of the currency is really important. Currency is key. And then look beyond the headlines and see, because a lot of headlines can be, like it says, outrageous to get clicks, clickbait. It just baffles me how often people, and you see it too, I know you do, or maybe you're not on social media because you're better than the rest of us, but I am, and a lot actually. And I am just constantly amazed at how often people will post articles that they clearly didn't read, and then people will comment on them when they clearly haven't read it either. And it's just everyone's like in this weird echo chamber, and they're not even interested in talking about what's in the article. They just want to blah blah blah, freak out. So don't be like that. And then look to see what kind of supporting sources your source is giving. Okay, and click on the links. And if it circles back to the same site, which I've like the snake eating its tail, that's bad. Okay. Sometimes articles will do that because they assume you're not going to click on those links because you're too lazy. And a lot of people are lazy, but we're not lazy, right? Click on them. And if they go back to the same website, not necessarily the same page, so I've had that happen before, but the same website, like you can't cite yourself. That just completely defeats the purpose of citation, right? So yeah. And then check your own biases. So we're going to talk about that today, because the only way to really be able to effectively evaluate sources is to know what your own biases are going into the situation. Because if you don't, then you literally will not see the problems. And you definitely won't look for them as hard as you would have. So, all right. And then if you're not sure, you want to send it to me, I'll tell you. If you're like, I don't know about this source, what do you think? I will let you know. Okay? Because you are only as good as your sources in an argument, and I want you to do a good job, whether I agree with you or not, right? So rather than put all this in again, this is a screenshot actually taken from a really good resource that Cornell University Library has from their LibGuides. And I think it does a really good job just explaining what bias is and the different kinds of bias that we can have and how they're so interwoven with the fabric of our thinking and the way we live and behave. So at its most basic, like it says at the top, bias is a tendency to believe that some people, ideas, et cetera, are just better than others, which often results in treating some people unfairly. Okay, so we're all like, no, bias is bad. So the kind of bias we normally are like, bias equals bad, would be this explicit bias here, all right? This is the kind that we consciously or deliberately hold and express about people or groups or whatever. And it's interesting because it says here, explicit bias and implicit bias can sometimes contradict each other, meaning that what we say on the outside and how we act on the outside and what we consciously think versus the unconscious attitudes and beliefs we have, that would be implicit bias, sometimes contradict each other. So this is attitudes, beliefs, et cetera, that occur outside of our conscious awareness and control and that affect our opinions and behavior. And here's the important thing, everybody has them, right? Even people whose job it is to remain objective, judges, journalists, teachers. I mean, we're humans too. But, right? And of course, we develop these over a lifetime. But if you're good at your job, right, somebody's supposed to remain objective, then you have to be super tough and, as it says, combat and change these biases however you can. Okay? Everyone needs to do that. But just the first step is knowing you have them. All right? And like letting that ring true. Confirmation bias. Okay, so this is something we're going to be going much more in depth into because this is where it gets a little here. I'm going to erase all this so it doesn't get so messy. This is the kind of stuff that is going to impact research. Okay. So with confirmation bias, or the selective collection of evidence, it is our subconscious tendency to seek and interpret information and other evidence in ways that affirm our existing beliefs, ideas, expectations, and/or hypotheses. It is affected by and feeds our implicit biases. And it can be most entrenched around beliefs and ideas that we are strongly attached to or that provoke a strong emotional response. So, what did I tell you, right? Emotions actually are the ones that are in control. And that's a bias that we have, is that we don't want to believe that about ourselves. Okay? We don't want to believe that that is what's guiding us. So the analogy, one of the better analogies I've heard is that is the elephant analogy, in that our emotions are the elephant and our logic and reasoning is the rider on the elephant. And we like to think that the rider is in control, but really the elephant goes where it wants to. And the job of the rider is just to justify the movements of the elephant, right? So the rider can do things the elephant can't, though. The rider can look back. The rider can look forward. The rider can talk to other riders, but only if you can get your elephants close enough together. And that's why we need to appeal to emotions too, because that's the way to bring people's elephants together. And then we can have a reasonable conversation. But we have to remember the elephant's really in control.